And we are starting our 6th class, and we're going to do a gray background with our Liquitex gray gesso. And I'm just applying it on as evenly as I can, horizontally, vertically, and then after I let it dry, we apply one more layer just to even it out. Next, we will be pulling out some white transfer paper like we did in the last one. And it's pretty straightforward. We're just going to cut it out. We're going to fit it properly to the artboard. And I was just testing it out, making sure that I had it on the right side, because you don't want to accidentally have it on the wrong side and you do all that work and it doesn't work out. So for this one, I added her eyelash shadows, and I kind of extended them off of the eyelash itself because I know that's going to be very important. I don't want to miss out on that one. And of course, highlights, mid-tone shadows, anything big or small, or little anchors to help you know exactly where you are. This was kind of a little bit of a tricky sweater, so I just added a lot of little anchor points, things that I know that I would need a shadow for, or things that I would need a highlight for. It's better to give yourself more information if you know you're going to struggle in a different area. And the only person who's really going to have this information is you. So why not give yourself as much information as you as possible and make your job a lot easier. I don't know about you, but I feel like straight hair is actually a little bit harder than curly hair. Curly hair, you could kind of like fake it a little bit, but straight hair, you have to get it spot on to make it look really shiny. So for this area, I make sure that I really get the highlights in there, and also I don't forget about the shadows that are underneath the hair. Again, we are going to spray our transfer with a fixative, and we will move on to the next step. Now we are blocking in our values of the face, and it's part 1 with a gloss glazing liquid in Grayscale. And again, we are starting off by adding, well, I don't know how I feel about adding gloss glazing liquid anymore to my Grayscale, and the reason why is, I don't know, it pulled up a little bit. I would highly recommend maybe just mixing your paint first in Grayscale and putting your gloss glazing liquid to the side and then adding your paint directly to the gloss glazing liquid, only because I've had some issues recently where I put the gloss glazing liquid into the mixed paint and it got really clumpy really fast. So don't make that mistake. Just mix your paint as normally for a Grayscale. And I know I've probably said this a bazillion times, but I think it's really important. Put your gloss glazing liquid onto the side, and then you can just take what you need when you need it. At this point in the painting, I am just finding the darkest values. And I'm almost just using, I think I'm just using pure black mixed pretty thin with my gloss glazing liquid. And remember, after a layer dries, if you need to go darker, you can always go on top of it. Even though they are transparent layers, you can always go darker, and actually could always go lighter as well. As I'm showing you here, it looks like I'm starting to find my highest highlights. And I'm not using pure white, I'm actually using somewhere in the middle. Because I know that I'll want to go lighter later, but I don't necessarily need to do it right now. And I don't know how I feel about this actually. Oh, you can see I just made a huge mistake. So I used a mop brush, and I'm gonna pause it. Okay, so I don't know if you can see right here, but I pulled up some of the paint on the face. And the reason why that happened is I had my little bit of a blender brush there, and what I wanted to do was, while it was still wet, just blend out the edges so it wouldn't look like a hard edge. But I waited a little bit too long, and there were two layers. I don't know if you recall. There was a layer underneath that was a little bit lighter in value, and then I added a second layer on and blended it. So what really ended up happening is the wet layer on top kind of reactivated the layer underneath, and by using that dry brush, I just pulled the paint straight off. So if I could go back in time and redo this, what I would do is actually just let this area go, let it dry, move on to a different area that I can work on, and come back later when I know for sure it has dried. Also, one last tip, if you're using your blender brush, make sure you're using your dry blender brush when your paint is still wet. Otherwise, you're gonna have problems. Okay, and we are gonna start playing it again. There I am back at that place again. It worked out, I think, but I could have probably waited a little bit longer for that to dry. I don't know why I was so determined to get that in. I think this is going really well, what I'm doing right now, and I'm just really placing the value, blocking the values in like I should. I have a problem with getting distracted by certain areas that are really interesting and fun to work on, but what I'm doing at this very moment is just working my way all the way around the face. Well, so far, I guess we'll see. And just laying everything down first before you start working on any kind of details, even if it's a large chunk of space. The eyes I'm keeping super loose. I don't need to add any details this first time around. That can all be added later. But by adding these first layers in, at least I'm getting like a chunk of like a shade there that I know for sure that I can work and detail out later. But by keeping all the layers kind of on the same level, then we're not gonna have things that need to be oiled out or like glazed out later. You can see here what I was talking about with like pat, like trying to get everything to just blend together. It's not gonna look super smooth, but it's like creating a gradient from dark to light on that cheek right here. And now up here, same thing. We're just kind of finding how to get from one shape to the other without looking like a hard line in between. If you're not too sure how to get those lines like properly, just make sure you're using some glazing liquid and it will help you all the way through. Okay, we're gonna move on to our next video. Okay, this is part 2 of blocking in the values with our gloss glazing liquid. And I noticed that it looks like I recorded, or I didn't record a part from the last video. I just kind of filled in the side, but it's not much. You didn't miss out on much. I think I got our important things in. Again, here I am, and I am mixing my value scale from light to dark, and I just kind of work my way down. You take from the top, take half, move it down, add a little bit of black. And I just made a really dark one. Added my glazing liquid, and I'm starting in with my, not my darkest value, but a shade up from that. So I think this is a pretty good technique that I'm doing right now. It looks like I have my blending brush in one hand and I have a round brush in my other hand. So my round brush right now that I'm holding, this brown one, is just putting the paint in, and then you could see while it's still wet, I'll take the blue blending brush and soften the edges. It's really, I think lips are probably for me one of the hardest things to paint because I have a really hard time with keeping everything super soft, and the transitions aren't necessarily like a hard edge. It's more like a change in pigment of the skin color. So I've gotten better at keeping a blending brush with me like I'm doing right now. So there's my round brush, and then the blue brush will blend it out and soften what I did. It just keeps all your features looking more natural. You know, as a reminder, we don't have hard features. Even if we have like amazing jawlines or whatever, it's still gonna have a softness to it because of the way our skin wraps around the skeleton. Okay, right here I am adding in my shadows underneath the hair. That's something that we don't think about very often, but what kind of shadows are underneath the hair, and to paint those in first. This way you can just layer on top of it with your next layer of hair, eventually getting into your midtones, and then finally at the end put your highlights in. But I'm not adding in every single shadow just yet, and I'll explain that later. But the ones that are closest to the hair, these are the ones that I'm adding in right now. So now I'm starting to add the next layer of hair on top of it, and I'm using my blending brush to do it. I'm trying to keep everything really soft looking. And plus the blending brush has, the bristles are a little bit firm on the edge or on the outside of it to make it almost look a little bit like hair. I don't know how to explain it, or maybe it's too soft. But either way, it is giving me a soft effect that later I can sharpen with a detail brush. And I'm doing the same thing. So I guess that's what I mean. It's the blending brush is going to be very soft, and the detail brush is going to give you hard lines. So I'm kind of going in between the blending brush. This one right now appears to be I have a liner brush, and I have a, it's so hard to see from the angle. I think, okay, so that's a round brush. So I'm using a round brush, a liner brush, and a mop brush. So all those kind of come to a point, but the liner brush is very thin and long. The round brush is shorter, but it comes to a point. And the mop brush is just very soft and like fluffy in a way. Sweaters can be very challenging to think about how to paint, but once you just start doing it, just focusing on one little section at a time, it's not as hard as you think, because similar to how we paint our flesh tone and our skin, just get the values, get the shadows and shapes in there first, and then the details can all come later. As long as we have that initial like sculpture of our shapes in there, then later on we can like play with that and really make things pop or fall back or whatever you decide to do. And if you're creating these little dots like I'm doing, try to curve it a little bit more than I am to make sure it's really following the shape of the sweater. It looks like I'm kind of getting a little bit lazy here, so it's not looking as rounded. Although that might just be the way that I'll have to take a look at the picture and see. I really like the way that is starting to look. Just a little bit of dot, white or light value dots popping out against the dark really gives it a really interesting effect. It does make it look more like that wool. But I do think, and maybe that's what I'm thinking about at this moment, yeah, is I think those dots could be softened out a little bit, not so hard. So it looks like I'm using a blending brush and just adding some soft highlights and shadows in there to soften out the work I just did. And because they are so young, it's really like, I would almost say you would want to avoid detail brushes and liner brushes completely until, well, either in the very beginning or in the very end when you're kind of doing like hair, fine hairs and eyelashes and things that you do want to be kind of crisp. But again, not every hair has to be crisp, otherwise it looks like, ugh, you have like too much hairspray. But to keep everything super soft, especially with someone that has such soft and beautiful skin as they do. I'm really starting to go in dark. And I'm not putting the dark hair values everywhere, as you can see. I'm kind of trying to avoid the areas where I know the highlights are going to be. I think it just makes it a little bit, not necessarily easier, but well, I guess we'll see. Okay, I'll see you in the next one. Okay, we are back. Blocking in values with Pyrrol orange. Okay, so we are just kind of doing the same thing that we did in the last two, but I got my basic values in. Now I'm going to go in with the flesh tone and create lighter and darker values with the flesh tone and really smooth the skin out as much as I possibly can. The only problem with this though is anytime you add white to a color, it's going to make it more opaque. And again, opaque means less see-through. The glazing liquid makes it more transparent, which means that you can see through it more. But it's almost like undoing the work that you've already done by adding white, especially when you do a grayscale or a grisaille first. So if I could go back in time and redo this, I would just go in with my Pyrrol orange and my gloss glazing liquid and just kind of do a little bit darker. I would add more layers of gloss glazing liquid in the areas that are darker and less layers of the gloss Pyrrol orange on layers that are lighter, instead of adding white, because I'm kind of undoing all the work that I've done before and it's just going to make it much harder. Yeah. There we go. There's my first big mistake. That's kind of what I'm talking about. Okay, so oh, I can't watch. So if I would have just gone in with a layer of Pyrrol orange first, and then if I wanted areas to be darker, I could always add a second layer of Pyrrol orange with gloss. But instead, what I'm doing is just sort of repainting the whole thing over again. And I can tell that this was a long painting session because when I shrank it down, it's still, this video lesson is still almost 13 minutes. So I was sitting here for a while just trying to get this right. But here's the thing. So you're probably thinking, yeah, but if you only added the gloss layer of Pyrrol Orange, like, wouldn't you still have to use white anyhow to soften the skin a little bit more? And that is true. Um, but here's what I'm thinking is if I only went in with Pyrrol Orange and thin layers of glaze and kind of just got the base tone color on there, like I've already added my values and I have my highlights, my midtones, and my shadows. So if I just started this painting session off with only doing the Pyrrol Orange and glazing liquid and kind of just get it in there, then if I wanted to add highlights later or if I wanted to soften areas, I could always do that later. But I don't necessarily have to redo the entire painting again, which is sort of what I'm doing right now. And I know that it is thin and you can still see what I did underneath, but it is creating just a little bit more work. And um, it's not a bad thing though. You know, like if you end, it does make it look a little bit like I don't know what I'm doing. Like watching this, I don't know if I was in a rush or what, but like adding that whole thick layer of white glaze right there. Yep, now I have to fix that up. Maybe I had a, I don't know what the deal is, but I don't think I would have done that if I was not tired or something. You always have to think about like what mind state you're in before you begin your painting session. If you don't feel like you're in the right mind state, maybe take the night off. So you don't make like silly mistakes that you wouldn't make on a different night. And if you do, I mean, this ended up becoming one of my favorite paintings. And I don't know if that would have happened if I didn't do this step. So you never really know what you're going to get until it's done. And sometimes you can't ever predict what you're going to do. So give yourself a break and just make sure you, like, if you do find yourself in a situation where you're like, oh man, I don't know how to get out of this, just keep going. Just figure it out. There are many ways. Like the great thing about doing it like this, where you're having all these layers underneath, is you can still see the work that you did before. It's not going to take much to fix it. It might just take more time to let it dry before you add on a new layer. And actually, I think it's starting to look good now. It's so nice when you can start seeing like what I'm doing right. Oh, maybe not right now. But when you can start seeing how the transition of lightness and darkness between your colors are really starting to create a shape, it's fun to watch when it's sped up like this. Now, for the chin, I don't know what I end up doing here, but I don't really need to add much more because if you think about it, the chin has more blue tones in it, so I really could just leave the chin as is. Um, I like that I added more orange for the Pyrrol orange into the cheeks because that one is going to be more like flushed, a little bit pinker in the final one. So it's good to kind of add more of those warm colors that will impact the later color glazes as well. It'll be interesting to see what I do for like right underneath the hair. If I could do this right now, that someone it's a fly on the wall. What I would probably do for the hair is just kind of go in with a um, kind of a neutral flesh tone color, pyrrole orange color, maybe grayed out, a little bit and just start thinning out the bangs a little bit. And how I do that is just kind of add in like fake, like you can see the forehead by going in between some of those hairs. Looks a little heavy there. I'm interested to see how this is going to go because I don't know if you remember, but there's a long eyelash shadow and it looks like it's disappeared. Also, there are like kind of longer shadows coming from the bangs above her right eye, and we're looking at it would be the left eye. So I'm gonna have to add those in. I think it would be kind of good to do it in this layer. I think this step is actually pretty straightforward. We're just kind of, by adding the second layer with our flesh tone color, our local color actually, just makes it a little bit easier to add in your final color glazes. Makes you feel like you know exactly where you're going to get. You just kind of tweak it here and there. Here we go. This is going to be really helpful. So what I'm doing... Okay, so what I did was I added my first layer of gloss for where those shadows are coming underneath the hair, because there were some that extended a little bit further and some that were a little bit lighter in color. So by using your flesh tone color, by just a darker value of it, it's actually in turn in the end going to make it appear more soft than if you're just using like a thinned out version of black. But I did use a thinned out version of black underneath the hair because that area was going to be pretty dark underneath. You still want it to be light and soft. But yeah. I created a little bit of a difference by having a dark shadow here and then a softer one over the face, so it didn't look like we just had black lines coming over her skin. Now what I'm doing is actually using this like Pyrrol orange flesh tone color for the sweater. It's good to keep the same colors throughout, even if you want to switch it later. If it's popping through a little bit, it's going to kind of blend a little bit better with the skin and everything together. And if you're thinking about it, everything is kind of giving a reflection of light off, even if it's just minuscule. So something like wool would definitely probably absorb some light, but it would also get, you know, the color of the skin on there. So a little bit of the flesh tone color on there is a good thing. We're going to move on to the next part of the painting. We're getting close. All right, we are beginning with color glazing. We have our Hansa yellow, cad red light. We have our Windsor blue or phthalo blue, white black, and I added Quinacridone crimson to it and my glazing gloss liquid. Now, as you remember from our last painting, the Quinacridone crimson has almost like a purple reddish hue. It's a little bit on the cooler side. So the cad red light is a little bit orangey, more on the warm side. So if you mix those two together, you're going to get kind of this interesting, like rosy color that works really well for flesh tone. That's why I like to kind of keep both of them in my palette. It really mixes it up a little bit. And here I am adding white again. Although, like, I know what I'm doing, so I guess we'll see what happens here. So this is what I'm talking about. By adding the cad red light and the Quinacridone magenta together, you're getting that rosy hue. So you can see kind of in the middle, that's the two mixed together. At the bottom is more of the Quinacridone by itself with the glaze. And you can kind of play with that mixture with going a little bit warmer to a little bit cooler. And it'll give it some shape, because if you think about it, warmer tones are more where like more light would be, and sometimes cooler would be in the shadows, so that would be kind of fun to play with. And I'm actually taking the Quinacridone, mixing it with my carbon black. Carbon black is blue underneath, it has a blue undertone, so it actually will make the Quinacridone crimson a little bit more violet, as you can see right here. And I have no problem with adding violets to skin, ever. Because if you're thinking about how we're seeing through skin, skin is slightly transparent, so you can actually see the effects of blood vessels. And in our cheek area especially, it's kind of like this transition with our skin being very thin down by our chin, where it's more blue, and it's more rosy here. So the two together are going to have more of a purple violet effect at times. So I think it's really good to kind of play with that. It makes your portraits come to life a little bit more, because it's kind of emulating nature and how we see people, not in a perfect photograph that's been airbrushed, but how we're seeing people moving and with flaws and blemishes and blood vessels. So it's good, it's really good to just push these ideas a little bit more, even if you're not seeing it into the painting. And I think that's where it's fun to be an artist, is you can push your ideas. And even though we're creating paintings for this specific class to look very similar to a photograph, the more you can push the ideas of things that you learn in science, nature, and anatomy, makes your paintings more interesting, more lifelike, and more you, because you're the one who sees these things and you're the one who is conveying that message to your audience. I like now that you can see on the left hand side the purple violet kind of Quinacridone colors compared to the right side of the painting where it's warmer. It really causes a push and pull of these colors. Hansa yellow and the cad red light make really nice oranges, as we know already. Now you notice I didn't put Pyrrol orange on here. I felt like I kind of, if I need to, or if I needed to, I could always add it later if I felt like I lost some of that underpainting. But at this point in time, everything had been laid down already. So now what we're trying to do is enhance what we did underneath. Okay, so we're moving on to sequence our next video. And we are back, color glazing part 2 with gloss glazing liquid, and I am starting off by mixing in some violets, it appears, and a little bit of white. This is a great color for the whites of the eyes. And I'm having a little bit more orange for the inside of the eyes. I think that's really good too. And even again with the push and pull of warmer and cooler colors is going to really make things push and pull. So again, now we're going in with the Quinacridone Crimson, which is a cooler red. Oh, I see here. So I'm actually using the Quinacridone on the shadow side. So I guess we'll see what we do on the other side of the painting, because that one is not in shadow as much. Okay, so as the eye is curving into the light, I am adding more of the CAD red light, which is a warmer red. Because remember, even though we're seeing the eye is kind of flat, but it's rounded. So the shadow side I was using the Quinacridone red, and on the other side I was using the CAD red light. And now what I'm doing is just adding in very thin highlight glazes for the highlight part where the shadows are not. It'll just make those shadows pop a little bit. If I went back in time to do this, I would definitely not be working on this part yet. I still have the right eye to work on before adding these details. They're just kind of fun to do. Sometimes I'll work on like the final details, highlights before I should, although it is kind of fun to see them pop. It kind of makes everything pull together. So when you're at this point in the painting, I guess you could do it, but I'd probably focus on keeping the eyes as even as possible, so I don't forget like what kind of paints I was using, or technique I was using, or even paintbrush. And on the highlight side, it is actually just really good to kind of do them at the same time. Well, not, like one after the other. Oh, actually, let me stop real quickly. What I'm doing at the moment is adding in the shadows of the eyelashes that are coming on top of the eye. So I used a glaze of brown or something. It looked like a brown. And the eyelash shadow going through the eye is going the opposite direction of how the actual shadows are going, and that's just the way the light is shining through. That's why you're getting that kind of effect. It's almost like a crisscross. You can see it in your paintings, or I'm sorry, you can see it in your photographs. You just have to know what you're looking for. Okay, so now I'm adding more of this warmer red because it is in the light side and the highlight side. So we're going to see more of those orange. Again, that your paintings of skin, especially with younger skin, like theirs, you're not trying to create the illusion that it's so smooth that it looks like a balloon. What we're trying to do is create a smoothness that the eyes can blend together, because I just want to remind you that we're constantly moving around. We're getting glimpses of people, not frozen in time. And even if we were frozen, like playing that game or whatever, you're still breathing, your eyes are blinking, movement is consistent. So we're also not going to be as still as a photograph. And the way we look at people is we're looking at them moving. So by having almost this paint-like texture, in different ways at every single moment of time. You don't necessarily need everything to be too smooth. You want it to be believable. You want it to feel real. And I know that a lot of my paintings, you can see like every single blemish and pore. And you can see there, I didn't have to like go over my shadows too much at that point in time. I didn't want to take away from the shadows that I made already. I just wanted to make them pop a little bit more. So I just worked that darker value of skin tone up to the shadow line and stopped. So here comes the fun part, just kind of going around and finding areas that need to be like softened in between your highlights and shadows. Creates more of a roundness. So I'm doing that with the nose at the moment. I'm adding in some lighter values here. It just makes it look less rigid here, but more soft. Again, that spot. I just love adding highlights there, don't I? But it does make it pop a little bit more. You can see it adds a lot of shape instantly. I'm going in and using that same color. It was like a neutral color, a grayish violet. It was almost like a gray down, a very light valued quinacridone or something. Toned. And now I'm just going in with my blending brush and trying to soften everything. And it didn't soften it completely, but that's okay. A lot of the stuff that we're not able to see either, the stuff that you see when you're really right there up close to your paintings, are like in our own minds while we're painting a huge deal. But if you're looking at it from this perspective, everything kind of blends together. It looks really nice. And we get so hung up on certain things, but even if I stop now, I think I would be really happy with the painting. Well, maybe not right now. Now I added those really harsh highlights. Ooh, man, now look at the right eye. By adding that one little highlight dot, and then also the one on the lash line, it actually made the shadows of the eyelashes pop more. Like, it's always fun to see because you're not really quite sure. Like, I've been doing this for my whole life and I still am not quite sure how things are going to look at the end, or like what my painting will look like. I know obviously it's going to be close to like what the picture is that I'm looking at, but it's always going to be different because I'm not a printer, I'm a human creating. But little things like that, like, you know, you have to paint this because you see it, but then it doesn't really look like much until one point you add a little white dot and everything just pops and you're like, oh, that's why that looks more real. That looks okay. This is looking good. That's why it's really important to kind of stick with it, even when you're frustrated, because sometimes you just don't know where things are going to go. You kind of feel like you're stuck, but I don't know, being stuck is sort of also like part of the project. Like, what am I doing right now? I feel like this is a mistake. I feel like maybe I'm starting to get tired or something because I'm starting to use bigger brushes. When I'm very tired, I always end up using bigger brushes and kind of trying to like speed through things, which feels like what I'm doing right now. I know that I was sitting for almost 4 hours for this one, so maybe what happened was I got to the end of my book and I'm like, I need to finish this right now. So I end up using bigger brushes. So hopefully it doesn't bite me in the butt. I think it looked pretty good. That may have been the best move, like using a flat brush to just really pull those dark layers in. It's funny because when I'm watching these, I kind of don't trust my judgment a lot. Like when I'm looking back at it, I'm like, why did you do that? But still the same person, you know, like you would probably end up doing the same thing if you're in the moment than watching it as a fly on the wall later. We say 20, hindsight is 2020, but also, like, you don't know what it was like being there either. So now it appears that I'm just kind of taking this neutralized yellow. Yeah, so it's nice too because I added the yellow into the straps already. So when you add the blue, everything does kind of look like it was meant to be with each other. You always want to have the colors like everywhere. So even though it's a blue strap, you should have the yellow, you should have the skin tone color into it. And even though it is a yellow sweater, you should have some touches of blue from the strap as well as the skin tone color. You're just kind of using a little, like you're just using less of those colors, but it should still be in there. Because it makes everything feel like it belongs in the same world, as opposed to just painting everything one solid color. It looks more like an illustration, it looks more like a cartoon, that they're separate from each other but together. So but in the real world, we kind of have all the colors in different variations and different tones and blended. We're coming to the end of this. I'm feeling pretty good about it. So I think this is the end of the painting actually. Let me double check. Yeah, we only have one more. Okay, I'll see you next time. All right, this is the final video and it's only 1 minute and 30 seconds, and I just wanted to show you, this is the alternative to adding the leveling gel that I used in the other one where it just kind of ruined everything. I'm just taking my liquid, my glazing gloss liquid, and just doing a thin layer on top, and this kind of oils out. It's not like really oiling out, we're not using oil, but it kind of levels everything out, but it's so much thinner. It's more translucent, and it's still going to make everything appear more even than if we just left it as is. And you can see some of those colors are starting to pop back out again by doing this, but remember, make sure your painting is completely dry before doing this. Don't make the mistake like I did in portrait number 4, I think it was. Just make sure everything is dry. All right, and I'm actually so happy with the way this turned out, and I don't know why, but I didn't do the final thing of removing the tape like I did with the other ones. I thought that was so much fun. So we're gonna call it here. Thank you again for joining me in this class, and it has been such a pleasure. I look forward to teaching you again in the future. Take care.